You've probably heard someone say they can't get high anymore after months of daily use. They're not exaggerating, and it's not in their head. PET scans show their brains have physically removed 20 to 60% of the receptors THC binds to, pulled them inside cells like furniture moved into storage during a flood. The brain does this to protect itself from overstimulation, but it creates a trap. What started as relaxation becomes a chemical requirement just to feel normal. The system designed to regulate your mood has been forced to regulate around an industrial extract it never evolved to process. A 2.5 milligram THC mint and a 90% concentrate dab both deliver the same psychoactive molecule, yet one preserves cognitive function while the other can trigger structural changes in your brain's reward circuitry. The distinction isn't subjective, it's written into the architecture of the endocannabinoid system itself. Your brain produces its own cannabinoids, primarily anandamide, which act as a dimmer switch for neurotransmission. When a neuron becomes overactive, it releases anandamide backward across the synapse to tell the upstream neuron to slow down. This happens constantly in your prefrontal cortex during focus, in your hippocampus during memory formation, and in your amygdala when processing fear. The CB1 receptor is the target. It sits on presynaptic terminals throughout your brain, ready to receive these backward signals. When activated, it reduces the release of neurotransmitters, GABA and glutamate, fine-tuning the intensity of neural communication. Anandamide is a weak, short-lived signal. It gets broken down quickly by an enzyme called FAAH, ensuring the system resets rapidly. THC is different. It's also a partial agonist at CB1 receptors, but it's far more stable. It accumulates in fatty tissue and lingers for hours, even days. At low doses, this stability can work with your endocannabinoid system, gently extending the natural regulation process. At high doses, it overwhelms it. The dose-response relationship isn't linear. Low-dose THC, typically between 1 and 3 milligrams, appears to enhance the signal-to-noise ratio in the prefrontal cortex. By slightly inhibiting GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, it allows for broader associative thinking without overstimulating glutamate, the excitatory counterpart. Rodent studies suggest this range can increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein critical for synaptic plasticity and neurogenesis. But once you cross into moderate or high doses, the system responds defensively. The brain perceives a threat to homeostasis and begins pulling CB1 receptors off the cell surface in a process called internalization. This is where the paradox emerges. The same molecule that can sharpen cognition at 2 milligrams can dismantle your reward system at 20. In the 1970s, cannabis flower contained around 2 to 4% THC. Smoking a joint delivered a modest, diffuse dose spread over time. By the early 2000s, selective breeding and hydroponic techniques pushed flower to 15 to 20% THC. Then came extraction. Butane hash oil, wax, shatter, and distillates now deliver 70 to 95% pure THC. A single inhalation from a concentrate can introduce more THC into your bloodstream than an entire joint from 1980. This wasn't driven by medical need or consumer demand for better therapy. It emerged from production economics. Higher potency products are easier to transport, harder to detect, and generate higher profit margins per unit weight. In legal markets, this was amplified by a regulatory quirk. Many jurisdictions price or tax cannabis based on THC percentage, not by dose or effect. Consumers, conditioned by alcohol's proof system, began equating higher THC with better value. Testing labs competing for cultivator business had financial incentives to report higher numbers. The result was a market-wide race toward potency that ignored the therapeutic profile, the terpenes, and CBD that historically modulated THC's effects. CBD, in particular, acts as a negative allosteric modulator of the CB1 receptor. It physically alters the receptor's shape, making it harder for THC to bind fully. Natural cannabis flower contains a balance of THC and CBD. Modern concentrates strip this away, isolating THC and removing the brake. What your brain is exposed to today isn't cannabis as it existed for millennia. It's an industrial product optimized for potency. not for the endocannabinoid system's design constraints. Microdosing relies on a principle called hormesis. A low dose of a stressor induces a beneficial adaptive response. At 1 to 3 milligrams of THC, you're engaging CB1 receptors without saturating them. The receptors remain on the cell surface, sensitive to both the external dose and your brain's internal cannabinoids. This preserves cognitive flexibility. In the prefrontal cortex, low-dose THC appears to increase associative thinking, the ability to connect disparate ideas without impairing working memory or executive function. The mechanism involves subtle modulation of GABAergic interneurons, the cells that provide inhibitory control over excitatory signaling. There's also evidence of anti-inflammatory effects. CB2 receptors, found on microglia, the brain's immune cells, respond to low-dose cannabinoids by reducing neuroinflammation. Chronic inflammation is increasingly recognized as a driver of cognitive decline, depression, and neurodegenerative disease. But the window is narrow. Most commercial products labeled microdose deliver 5 to 10 milligrams, double to quadruple the functional threshold. At this range, you begin affecting memory consolidation. The hippocampus, dense with CB1 receptors, relies on precise timing of neural activity to encode short-term memories into long-term storage. Excessive CB1 activation disrupts this process, which is why cannabis impairs the formation of new memories, even at moderate doses. The mythology of microdosing often conflates taking less with microdosing. Taking half a gummy isn't precision, it's dose reduction. True microdosing requires deliberate control over milligram intake, something almost impossible with combustion or most commercial edibles. And even within the therapeutic range, individual variation is enormous. Genetic differences in CB1 receptor density, FAAH enzyme activity, and liver metabolism mean the same 2 milligram dose affects two people differently. Repeated exposure to high-potency, THC, forces a structural adaptation. The brain, overwhelmed by constant CB1 activation, pulls receptors into the cell through endocytosis. PET imaging studies show that chronic high-potency users have 20 to 60% fewer available CB1 receptors in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus compared to non-users. This isn't tolerance in the casual sense, needing more to feel the same effect. It's a remodeling of the system. With fewer receptors on the surface, your brain's own anandamide has nowhere to bind. The natural dimmer switch stops working. The consequence is reward deficiency. The nucleus accumbens, the brain's primary reward processing hub, depends on CB1 signaling to modulate dopamine release. When CB1 receptors are downregulated, baseline dopamine activity becomes insufficient. Natural rewards, food, social interaction, accomplishment, lose their emotional weight. This is anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. Users describe needing cannabis just to feel normal, not to get high. That's not psychological dependence, it's homeostatic recalibration. The brain has adapted to the presence of high-dose exogenous cannabinoids and can no longer maintain equilibrium without them. Stopping use triggers withdrawal. The amygdala, responsible for processing fear and stress, upregulates corticotropin-releasing factor, a stress hormone. This produces intense anxiety, insomnia, irritability, and mood instability. The symptoms peak around day 3 and can last weeks, far longer than the drug's half-life would predict. The brain isn't clearing THC, it's rebuilding its receptor architecture. Cannabis use disorder isn't rare. Among regular users of high-potency concentrates, 16 to 30% meet diagnostic criteria for dependence. The pharmacokinetics matter. Concentrates deliver THC to the brain in seconds, creating a reinforcement pattern similar to other fast-acting drugs. The faster the onset, the stronger the association between consumption and reward. The human brain undergoes massive structural reorganization until age 25. Synaptic pruning eliminates unused connections, while myelination insulates active pathways, increasing signal efficiency. The endocannabinoid system orchestrates this process. It determines which synapses survive and which are eliminated. Introducing high-potency THC during this window interferes with the construction project. Imaging studies show that adolescents who use cannabis regularly, especially high-potency products, display reduced white matter integrity in the prefrontal cortex. White matter is the brain's wiring. It determines how efficiently different regions communicate. The cognitive effects are measurable. Working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information temporarily, shows persistent deficits even after months of abstinence. Attention and impulse control, both governed by prefrontal circuits still under development, are impaired. These aren't subjective complaints. They're observable in neuropsychological testing and functional MRI. The tragedy is that adolescence is when many people begin experimenting with cannabis, drawn by curiosity, peer influence, or self-medication for anxiety and depression. The brain they're using to make that decision is the same brain being reshaped by the drug. High-potency cannabis doesn't cause psychosis in most users, but in genetically vulnerable individuals, it can trigger a break from reality that might never have occurred otherwise. The mechanism involves dopamine dysregulation and glutamate storms. CB1 receptors inhibit GABA interneurons in the ventral tegmental area, the brain's dopamine factory. Moderate activation increases dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens, the basis of cannabis's rewarding effects. But at high doses, especially with repeated use, the system destabilizes. Dopamine signaling in the mesolimbic pathway becomes erratic. At the same time, downregulation of CB1 receptors removes the brake on glutamate transmission. Glutamate is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. Without proper inhibition, it floods synapses, creating sensory overload and disorganized thinking, hallmarks of psychosis. Cannabis-induced psychosis often presents as paranoia, delusions, or hallucinations. In some cases, it resolves within days of stopping use. In others, it precipitates a chronic psychotic disorder. The line between transient drug-induced symptoms and permanent illness is blurry, and early intervention is critical. Addiction isn't moral failure. It's a predictable outcome of repeated receptor activation in the brain's reward circuitry. Cannabis use disorder manifests as compulsive use despite negative consequences, relationship strain, impaired work performance, financial cost, or health decline. The neurobiological substrate is clear. Downregulated CB1 receptors, blunted dopamine signaling, and upregulated stress hormones create a state where the user needs the drug to achieve baseline function. Withdrawal produces anxiety, depression, insomnia, and irritability, not because the person is weak, but because their homeostatic systems have recalibrated around exogenous cannabinoid input. Treatment is complicated by the fact that cannabis withdrawal, while unpleasant, isn't life-threatening. Unlike alcohol or benzodiazepines, you can't die from stopping cannabis. This creates a perception that it's not real addiction. But the subjective experience, craving, loss of control, continued use despite harm, meets every clinical definition. The evidence doesn't support blanket claims that cannabis is safe or dangerous. It reveals a dose-dependent, context-dependent, and biology-dependent reality. Low-dose, infrequent use in adults with fully developed brains appears to carry minimal long-term risk. Some users report cognitive benefits, reduced anxiety, or improved sleep. Whether these effects are pharmacological, placebo, or both remains unclear, but the harm profile at this level is low. High-potency daily use, especially in adolescence, produces measurable neural remodeling, cognitive impairment, and elevated risk for psychosis and dependence. The brain adapts to the chemical environment it's placed in, and chronic high-dose THC forces adaptations that undermine the endocannabinoid system's regulatory function. The science is clear. Dose determines outcome. What remains uncertain is whether public understanding will catch up before another generation of adolescent brains is used as an uncontrolled experiment in receptor downregulation. If you're still here, thank you for being part of this journey. Subscribe to stay tuned for what's next.